the lottery ticket that changed everything. I remember the way they looked at me when I told them I wanted to major in art history. The disappointed sighs, the exchanged glances that screamed, "She's doing it again." My father pinched the bridge of his nose, a habit he displayed whenever he thought I was making another terrible life decision. "Rachel, honey," my mother said in that saccharine voice she used when she was trying not to show her frustration, "wouldn't business administration be more practical? You know your brother is already on track to make partner at his firm." Ah yes, my brother Michael. The golden child. The Harvard law graduate. The one who had his life together. The constant reminder of everything I wasn't. I was 29 when this story begins. Still living in a cramped apartment in Portland with my roommate Jess, working as a museum assistant and doing freelance writing on the side. I wasn't rich, but I was happy. My articles on art and culture were starting to get noticed, and I had just been offered a position curating a small exhibition at our museum. But to my parents, none of that counted as success. Success in the Anderson family was measured in salary digits, property value, and how impressed their country club friends were when they bragged about their children. By those metrics, I was a catastrophic failure. Every birthday and Christmas was the same routine. Michael would receive thoughtful, expensive gifts that aligned with his interests and aspirations. I would get self-help books, gift cards to stores that sold professional attire, or worse, things my mother thought I should like, not what I actually enjoyed. But my 30th birthday took the cake. Literally and figuratively. "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you," my parents sang half-heartedly as my mother placed a store-bought cake in front of me. We were sitting in their immaculate dining room in suburban Connecticut, where I'd reluctantly agreed to spend my milestone birthday weekend. Michael couldn't make it, important case ratch, you understand, but had sent an expensive bottle of champagne that my father was now pouring into crystal flutes. 30, my mother sighed. I can't believe it. When I was 30, I already had you and Michael, and your father had just been promoted to VP. I forced a smile and blew out the candles. My wish? To make it through the weekend without a panic attack or saying something I'd regret. "So," my father said, setting down his reading glasses and folding the Wall Street Journal he'd been glancing at throughout dinner, "any big plans for this decade? Career advancements? Perhaps thinking about settling down?" Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "You know, Cynthia's daughter just got engaged to a neurosurgeon. They met on one of those dating apps. What's it called? The exclusive one for professionals?" "The League," I muttered, having heard about it at least 20 times from her. "Yes, that's it. Have you tried it? I'd be happy to pay for a subscription." "Mom, I'm not interested in dating apps right now. And I actually do have some exciting career news. The museum has asked me to curate the upcoming—" "Oh, before I forget," my father interrupted, reaching into his pocket. "Your birthday present." He slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was a single scratch-off lottery ticket and a cheap birthday card signed "Love, Mom and Dad" in my mother's handwriting. I stared at it, waiting for the punchline. For the real gift. For them to say, "Just kidding," and present me with something that showed they knew me at all. Even a gift card to my favorite bookstore would have sufficed. But they just looked at me expectantly. "A lottery ticket?" I finally asked, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. My father chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Well, honey, we figured your chances of winning the lottery are about the same as your chances of making something of that art degree, so why not give it a shot?" My mother laughed as if this was the funniest joke she'd ever heard. "Oh, Richard, don't be mean. Rachel knows we're just teasing." She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But seriously, darling, maybe it's time to consider a more practical path. 30 is not too late to go back to school for something sensible." I felt my cheeks burning with humiliation and anger. 30 years of diminishment, of being treated like a disappointment, of having my passions ridiculed, all crystallized in that moment. In that stupid lottery ticket. "Thank you for the cake," I said stiffly, standing up. "I think I'm going to turn in early." "Oh, Rachel, don't be so sensitive," my mother sighed. "We're just looking out for your future." I didn't respond. I just took my envelope and went upstairs to the guest room, my old bedroom, now redecorated as a multi-purpose space with barely any trace that I'd lived there for 18 years. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I stared at the lottery ticket. A $10 scratch-off with cheerful lettering proclaiming, "Birthday Bonanza. Win up to $500,000. What the hell, I thought, grabbing a penny from my purse. If nothing else, I could tell my parents I'd lost, reinforcing their belief in my perpetual bad luck and poor life choices. I scratched off the first row. Nothing. Second row. Nothing. Third row. I blinked, sure I was seeing things. I scratched the rest of the ticket with shaking hands, then checked and rechecked the winning combinations. "Holy shit," I whispered to the empty room. I had won. Not the full $500,000, but $350,000. After taxes, it would be somewhere around $250,000. More money than I'd ever had in my life. More money than I'd likely see from a decade of museum work. My first instinct was to run downstairs and show my parents. To see the shock on their faces. To finally have something that would impress them. But something stopped me. The memory of my father's smug face as he handed me the ticket. "Your chances of winning are about the same as your chances of making something of that art degree." I sat there for a long time, the winning ticket clutched in my hand, and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to tell them. Not yet. The next morning, I made an excuse about a work emergency and left Connecticut early, the ticket securely in my wallet. Back in Portland, I immediately called the Oregon Lottery office to verify my win and start the claim process. "Congratulations," the lottery representative said cheerfully. "You'll need to come to our Salem office to claim a prize of this size. Bring valid ID, your social security card, and of course the signed ticket." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what this money could mean for me. Financial security. No more roommates. Maybe even buying a small place of my own. The freedom to pursue the career I loved without constantly worrying about making rent. But more than anything, I kept thinking about my parents' faces when they found out. When they realized their failure daughter had lucked into more money than they'd thought she'd earn in a lifetime. The next day, I drove to Salem, claimed my prize, and opened a new bank account at a different bank than my usual one. I didn't want the money going into my regular account where my parents might somehow see it if they ever helped me with finances, which they occasionally did, always with strings attached. I told exactly 2 people about my win, my roommate Jess and my best friend Tyler. Both swore to absolute secrecy. "What are you going to do with it?" Jess asked as we split a bottle of cheap champagne in our living room that night. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I'm not telling my parents. Not after the way they gave me that ticket." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "They're going to find out eventually." "Maybe," I said, taking another sip. "But not before I figure out exactly how I want this to play out." A week later, my phone rang with my mother's weekly check-in call. These calls usually consisted of her updating me on Michael's latest achievements, neighborhood gossip, and thinly veiled inquiries about when I was going to get serious about my life. "Hi, Mom," I answered, trying to sound normal. "Rachel, did you scratch off that lottery ticket yet?" She sounded unusually eager. I froze. Why was she asking about the ticket? Had they somehow found out? Yeah. "No luck, though," I lied, my heart racing. "Oh," she sounded genuinely disappointed. Your father and I were just talking about it. Apparently someone in Connecticut won quite a lot on one of those birthday bonanza tickets recently. Wouldn't it have been something if it had been you? I almost laughed out loud at the irony. Yeah, that would have been something. Well, never mind. How's the museum job? Any chance of advancement there? And just like that, we were back to our regular programming. But her question about the ticket nagged at me. Why had she asked? Just casual conversation or something more? My answer came 3 days later when my father called, a rare occurrence that usually meant bad news. Rachel, he said without preamble, your mother and I have been thinking. That lottery ticket we gave you, you didn't happen to keep the ticket number, did you? My blood ran cold. No, I threw it away. Why? Well, he cleared his throat awkwardly. It turns out the store where I bought it sold a winning ticket that same day. Quite a substantial prize. We thought, well, in the unlikely event it was yours. I could practically hear the dollar signs in his voice. Sorry, Dad. I scratched it off, saw I didn't win, and tossed it. I was surprised at how easily the lie came. Ah, that's unfortunate. Would have been quite the windfall. Though I suppose if it had been a winner, you'd have told us right away. There was a question in his statement. Of course, I said, my knuckles white around the phone. Why wouldn't I? After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence. They knew. Or at least they suspected. The timing of the winning ticket was too coincidental. And now they were fishing for information. I called Tyler in a panic. They're asking about the ticket. So? Just tell them you won. What's the big deal? You don't understand how they are, I said, pacing my small bedroom. They'll take credit for it somehow. They'll say it was their gift, their foresight. They'll try to advise me on what to do with it. They'll hold it over my head forever as the only good thing that ever happened to me, and it was because of them. Tyler was quiet for a moment. So, what are you going to do? I stopped pacing. I'm going to control the narrative. For the next 2 weeks, I lived my normal life while quietly making preparations. I consulted with a financial advisor who specialized in lottery winners. I spoke with a lawyer about protecting my assets. I researched investments, particularly in art and small businesses areas I was passionate about, and I drafted a detailed plan for my future. Meanwhile, my parents grew increasingly persistent. My mother called almost daily with thinly veiled inquiries about my finances. Had I checked my old purses for the ticket? Was I sure I'd thrown it away? Perhaps I should check my apartment thoroughly? My father took a different approach. He started sending me articles about lottery winners who'd lost everything through poor financial management. He offered to put me in touch with his investment advisor if I ever came into money. He even suggested I add him as a co-signer on my bank accounts for security purposes. It was almost comical how transparent they were being. Finally, 3 weeks after my birthday, they played their trump card. My mother called on a Sunday morning, her voice tight with forced casualness. Rachel, your father and I have been thinking. We believe that lottery ticket we gave you might have been the winning one. Oh. I feigned surprise. What makes you think that? Well, we checked with the convenience store and they confirmed they sold the winning ticket on your birthday. It was a birthday bonanza scratch-off just like the one we gave you. The odds of 2 winning tickets being sold at the same location on the same day are, well, astronomical. I could hear my father's voice in the background, prompting her. We think, she continued, that perhaps you did win and are confused about the process. Or maybe you're overwhelmed. It's a lot of money after all. It certainly would be, I agreed neutrally. So, her voice brightened, we've decided to come to Portland next weekend to help you sort it all out. Won't that be nice? We can go to the lottery office together, figure out the claiming process, and help you make some sensible decisions about the money. There it was. They were so convinced I had the winning ticket that they were willing to fly across the country to get their hands on it. Actually, I said slowly, I was planning to come to Connecticut next weekend myself. I have some news I'd like to share in person. News? My mother couldn't hide her eagerness. What kind of news? Let's discuss it when I see you, I said. I'll book my flight today. After hanging up, I smiled to myself. Trap was set. I spent the next week finalizing my plans. By Thursday, everything was in place. I flew to Connecticut on Friday evening, having explicitly asked my parents not to pick me up at the airport. I wanted to rent a car, I told them. For independence. The real reason? I had a few stops to make before arriving at their house. Saturday morning, I pulled into their driveway in my rental car. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my overnight bag and a folder of documents and rang the doorbell to my childhood home. My mother answered, looking more polished than usual for a Saturday morning. Rachel! We were starting to worry. Your flight got in so late last night. I kissed her cheek and stepped inside. My father was waiting in the living room, pretending to read the newspaper but setting it aside too quickly when I entered. There's my girl, he said with unusual warmth, giving me an awkward hug. How was your flight? Fine, I said, setting my bag down. Thanks for having me on such short notice. Of course, of course. We're always happy to see you. My mother fluttered around, offering coffee, breakfast, snacks, a level of hospitality I rarely received on my visits home. We made small talk for about 15 minutes, them asking overly interested questions about my job, my apartment, my friends, before my father finally cut to the chase. So, you mentioned you had some news to share? Something important enough to fly out here? This was it. I took a deep breath. Yes. I wanted to tell you in person. I paused, watching them lean forward expectantly. I've accepted a new position. I'm going to be the assistant curator at the Portland Museum of Modern Art. Their faces fell so dramatically it would have been comical if it weren't so hurtful. Oh, my mother said flatly. Well, that's nice, dear. My father didn't even try to hide his disappointment. That's the big news? A small promotion at the museum? I nodded, maintaining an expression of enthusiasm. It's actually a significant step up. And there's a decent raise, too. How decent? My father asked bluntly. Enough that I'm thinking of buying a condo, I said, which was true, though not because of the museum salary. That got their attention. A condo? My mother's eyebrows shot up. In Portland? Those aren't cheap. How could you possibly afford a down payment? I shrugged. I've been saving, and I've made some good investments. My father scoffed. What investments? You've never shown the slightest interest in finance. Things change, I said simply. Actually, that brings me to something I wanted to ask you both. They exchanged a look, barely containing their excitement. Here it comes, they were thinking. She's finally going to tell us about the lottery ticket. Do you remember what you said when you gave me that lottery ticket for my birthday? I asked, looking directly at my father. He shifted uncomfortably. I don't recall exactly. You said my chances of winning were about the same as my chances of making something of my art degree, I reminded him, keeping my voice level. Do you remember that? Rachel, my mother interjected. Your father was just joking. You know how he is with his little quips. It wasn't a joke to me, I said quietly. It was just one more example of how little you think of me. How little you've always thought of me. The room went silent. That's not true, my father finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I pulled out my phone and opened my photos. This is a text you sent me when I told you I got into the art history program. I showed him the message, throwing good money after bad. Don't come asking us for help when you can't find a job. I scrolled to another. This is from when I got my first museum job. The text read, at least it's employment. Might want to keep looking for something with advancement potential, though. And this, I continued, showing them an email, is what you wrote when I told you about my first published article. The message was brief. Interesting hobby. Has Michael told you about his new partnership track? My parents had the decency to look uncomfortable. We've always wanted what's best for you, my mother said defensively. We pushed you because we care. No, I corrected her. You pushed me because you wanted me to be someone else. Someone more like Michael. Someone who valued the same things you do. I pulled the folder from my bag and removed a document. This is a statement from my new investment account. I opened it a month ago. I slid the paper across the coffee table. My father picked it up, put on his reading glasses, and then visibly startled. $250,000, he sputtered. Where did you get this kind of money? My mother grabbed the statement from him, her eyes widening. Rachel, what is this? Did you win the lottery? I let the question hang in the air for a moment before answering. Yes. That ticket you gave me as a joke, as a symbol of how worthless you think my choices are? It won. Not the full amount, but enough to change my life. Their expressions were everything I'd imagined and more: shock, disbelief, and most satisfyingly, the dawning realization that they had handed me a small fortune while simultaneously belittling me. Why didn't you tell us? My father demanded, his face reddening. Because of exactly how you're acting right now, I said calmly. You didn't give me that ticket out of generosity. You gave it to me as a way to remind me of my failures. And the moment you suspected it might be worth something, you tried to insert yourselves into the situation, to take control, just like you've always tried to do with my life. That's not fair, my mother protested. We're your parents. We have a right to... To what? I interrupted. To money you gave me as a gift? To decisions about my future? I'm 30 years old, Mom. Those rights expired a long time ago. My father had recovered his composure somewhat. His expression shifted from shock to calculation. Well, he said, attempting a smile, this is certainly unexpected but wonderful news. Your mother and I are thrilled for you. And of course, we want to help you manage this windfall responsibly. I'm sure you do, I said, unable to keep a hint of sarcasm from my voice. But I've already taken care of that. I pulled out more documents from my folder. I've consulted with a financial advisor who specializes in lottery winners. I've set up a diverse investment portfolio. I've made provisions for taxes. I laid out each document as I mentioned it. I've done everything responsibly without your input. My mother looked on the verge of tears, though whether from disappointment at being excluded or genuine emotion, I couldn't tell. But we could have helped, she insisted. Your father has excellent financial connections. I'm sure he does, I acknowledged. But this is my money and my life. For once, I'm making decisions without your judgment clouding them. My father's expression hardened. So you flew all the way out here just to rub our noses in it? To tell us you don't need or want our help? That seems childish and vindictive, Rachel. I had expected this, the attempt to make me feel guilty, to paint my independence as a character flaw. Actually, I said, pulling out the final document from my folder, I came to give you this. I handed him a check for $10,000. "What's this?" he asked, staring at it. The cost of the lottery ticket was $10. That's 1,000 times what you spent. I think that's a fair return on investment, don't you? They both stared at me, speechless. I'm not vindictive, I continued. I don't want to cut you out of my life. I just want you to see me, really see me for who I am, not who you wish I was. I want a relationship based on mutual respect, not constant disappointment. And you think money will accomplish that? My father asked, though he made no move to return the check. No, I admitted. Money won't fix what's broken between us. But it might get your attention long enough for you to hear what I've been trying to tell you for years. I'm happy with the path I've chosen. My life has value, even if it doesn't look like Michael's. Even if it doesn't meet your definition of success. I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the conversation. I'm going to get some air. Take some time to think about whether you want a relationship with the daughter you have, not the daughter you wanted. I'll be back in an hour, and then I'd like to take you both to lunch. We can talk about the future, mine and hopefully ours as a family. I walked out, leaving them staring after me, the check still clutched in my father's hand. Cool Connecticut air felt good on my face as I walked around the neighborhood. I texted Tyler a quick update. Told them. Went exactly as expected. Feeling strangely calm. His response came quickly. Proud of you. How did they take the check? Didn't throw it back at me, so that's something. I spent the next 45 minutes walking and reflecting. I wasn't naive enough to think one conversation would repair decades of damaged family dynamics. But it was a start. I had finally stood up for myself, not with anger or resentment, but with dignity and clarity. When I returned to the house, I found my parents in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones that stopped abruptly when I entered. Rachel, my mother said, her voice oddly formal. Your father and I have been talking. I figured, I replied, leaning against the door frame. My father cleared his throat. We owe you an apology. That was unexpected. In 30 years, I could count on one hand the number of times my father had apologized for anything. We've been unfair in how we've judged your choices, he continued, looking uncomfortable but pushing through. And you're right, the way we gave you that lottery ticket was thoughtless and hurtful. We never meant to make you feel less than, my mother added, though her tone suggested this was a revelation to her. We just worried about you. I know you did, I acknowledged. In your own way. We'd like to accept your invitation to lunch, my father said. And perhaps we could start fresh. Learn more about this new job of yours. See your life in Portland through new eyes. It wasn't a complete transformation. There was still a hint of calculation in my father's gaze, a sense that he was adjusting his approach rather than his fundamental perspective. But it was more than I had expected. I'd like that, I said simply. My mother hesitated, then stepped forward to hug me. I'm sorry we made you feel invisible, Rachel. You were never a disappointment to us. We just didn't understand. You never tried to, I said softly, but I hugged her back. Lunch was surprisingly pleasant. For the first time in memory, my parents asked genuine questions about my work, my interests, my friends. They still slipped occasionally into old patterns, a comment about financial security here, a mention of Michael's accomplishments there, but they caught themselves, sometimes even apologizing. I told them about my plans for the money, a modest condo in a neighborhood I loved, investments in small art galleries, a fund for traveling to study art in different cultures. I wasn't planning on quitting my job. The museum work was still my passion. The money just meant I could pursue it without constant financial stress. You've thought this through more thoroughly than I gave you credit for, my father admitted as we finished dessert. I've always been thorough, Dad. You just never noticed because you were looking at the what, not the how. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. As we were preparing to leave the restaurant, my mother touched my arm. "Would you consider coming for Christmas this year? Michael will be bringing his new girlfriend and, well, it would be nice to have everyone together." It was such a normal request, the kind of thing mothers ask daughters all the time. Not an obligation or an opportunity for comparison, just a desire for family togetherness. "I'll think about it," I promised. And I meant it. The drive back to their house was quiet but not uncomfortable. As I pulled into the driveway, my father turned to me from the passenger seat. "The check," he said abruptly. "We can't accept it." "Dad." "No, listen. That money is yours. You're right, we gave you that ticket as a gift, however thoughtlessly. The winnings are yours alone." He pulled the check from his pocket and held it out to me. "We don't want or deserve a share of it." I looked at the check for a long moment, then gently pushed his hand back. "Keep it," I said. "Not as a share of my winnings or as an obligation. Keep it as a symbol that I value our relationship enough to want to share my good fortune with you, despite our difficulties. That's what family should do." His eyes looked suspiciously damp as he slowly returned the check to his pocket. "Thank you." "You're welcome." I smiled. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Next birthday, put a little more thought into the gift." My father actually laughed, a genuine laugh, not the sarcastic chuckle I was used to. "I think we can manage that." That evening, as I prepared to head back to my hotel, I had politely declined their offer to stay in the guest room, needing some personal space. My mother handed me a small package wrapped in simple blue paper. "What's this?" I asked. "A belated birthday present," she said, looking uncharacteristically shy. "A real one this time." I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with my initials embossed on the cover. When I opened it, I found a black and white photograph tucked into the first page, me at about 7 years old, standing proudly beside a crayon drawing that had won a school art contest. "You always had an eye for beauty," my mother said softly. "I saved that photo all these years. I thought maybe you could use the journal for your museum work or for your writing." It wasn't an expensive gift. Not compared to the checks they wrote for Michael's law school graduation or the car they helped him buy. But it was thoughtful in a way their gifts to me rarely were. It acknowledged who I was, not who they wanted me to be. "Thank you, Mom," I said, genuinely touched. "I love it." "We're trying, Rachel," she said, her voice slightly strained. "It might take us some time to get it right, but we're trying." "That's all I've ever wanted," I told her honestly. The flight back to Portland the next day gave me time to reflect. The weekend hadn't gone exactly as I'd planned. I had expected more anger, more defensiveness, maybe even a dramatic confrontation. Instead, there had been this strange, tentative reaching toward a new kind of relationship. It was messy and imperfect, full of old habits that would take time to break. But it was a beginning. When I landed, I had texts from both my parents, something that had never happened before. My mother asking if I'd arrived safely. My father sending a link to an article about an art exhibition he thought might interest me. Small things. Baby steps. But significant. I texted Jess to let her know I was on my way home, then opened my email to find the official offer letter from the Portland Museum of Modern Art for the assistant curator position, a promotion I had earned entirely on my own merit, completely unrelated to my lottery win. Looking at that email, I felt a calm sense of validation wash over me. My life was taking shape exactly as I wanted it to, through both luck and hard work. For the first time, I was fully in control of my own story. The lottery ticket that was meant to symbolize my failure had instead become the catalyst for something new, not just financial freedom, but a chance to redefine my relationship with my parents and, more importantly, with myself. As my rideshare pulled up to my apartment building, I made a mental note to buy a lottery ticket for Michael's next birthday. Not as a jab or a joke, but as a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected gifts can lead to the most meaningful changes. And maybe, just maybe, to complete the circle of irony, his ticket would win too. Life had a funny way of working out sometimes. The end.